Hi, I'm Emily from emilylearning.com, where we partner with students to ace their OANN, math, physics, and chemistry. So in this lesson, we'll be looking at square root. So what is square root? So a square root is the square root of a number is a value that when multiplied by itself gives the original number. So what do we mean by that? So if I want to square root 25, okay, I need to think of what times what gives 25. So I know that 5 times 5 gives 25. So the square root of 25 is 5. All right. So we represent square root by this number, and the number that we want to square root, we'll write it inside the square root here. So for example, the square root of 25 is written in this manner, square root 25. We can also try looking at maybe square root of 16. So what is square root of 16? So to find the square root of 16, we need to think of what times what gives 16. So we know that 4 times 4 gives 16. So therefore, the square root of 16 is 4. Okay, so something to note, the square root of a number is not always a whole number. So what does it mean? So for example, if you have to type square root in a calculator, okay, and you square root 18, so you'll get 4.242640687. So for such numbers, right, it's quite hard to determine what is the square root unless you use the calculator. Okay, so for square root 18, you do not get a whole number when you square root it. Okay, so there's a term called perfect square. So recall that when we square root 25, we get a whole number 5 because 5 times 5 is 25. Okay, but when we square root 18, 4.242640687 blah 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 times 4.24242640687 blah 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 will give 18. So therefore the square root of 18 is this. And this is not a whole number, right? There's a lot of decimals. Okay, so whenever we can square root a number and we get a whole number, we call this number here a perfect square. So 25 is a perfect square, so therefore when you square root 25, you get a whole number 5. 18 is not a perfect square, so when you square root 18, you do not get a whole number. Okay, so why is this important? Well, this is because, okay, if we want to find a square root of a perfect square by prime factorization, we need it to be a perfect square. So if it's not a perfect square, you need to use your calculator in short, because it's very hard for you to determine what number it is. Okay, so what times what gives this number, okay, when it is not a whole number, because you know that, okay, square root of 1 is 1, square root of 4 is 2, because 2 times 2 is 4, square root of 9 is 3, because 3 times 3 is 9, right? But how about 8? What times what is equals to 8? Okay, is it 2? It is going to be more than 2, less than 3. Is it 2.1 or is it 2.125 or is it 2.125, 123, and so on? So it's going to be very tough when it's not a perfect square. So if it's not a perfect square, we'll need a calculator to evaluate it. So whenever you need to find square root, okay, by prime factorization, it's always for perfect square. Okay, so now before we go on to look at square roots of perfect square by prime factorization, the first thing you need to know is the square root of an index notation with even powers give a whole number. So if you try in the calculator, square root of 3 square, so you know square power 2, okay, this is an even power, 2 is an even number, so it's an even power. So when you square root an index notation that has even power, you will get a nice number, a whole number. If you square root index number with odd power, you will not get a whole number. So in other words, we can square root 3 square, 3 to the power 4, 3 to the power 6, 3 to the power of 8, and so on. All right. And notice that if I were to square root 3 square, I will halve its index. So from power 2, it becomes power 1 when I square root it. So here, 3 to the power of 4. So when I square root it, I halve its power, so it becomes 3 square. So in other words, if we have square root of 3 to the power of 6, so when you square something, you halve its power, so half of 6 is 3. So 3 cubed is 3 times 3 times 3, which is 27. All right. Okay, now let's, since we have talked about the square roots, Okay, let's take a look at how you can find the square root of perfect square by prime factorization. And to do so, I'll make use of an example. Okay, so now let's take a look at example 1. You're asked to express 16 as a product of its prime numbers in index notation and hence find the square root of 16. So first, let's express 16, okay, in index notation. So from here, I know 16 can be written as 2 to the power of 4. So now square root of 16 is equals to square root of 2 to the power of 4. So when you square root something, okay, you are going to halve its power. So from power 4, half of it will become power 2. So therefore, square root of 16 is equals to 2 squared, which is equals to 4. All right. Okay. There's an error, typo error. So you're asked to express 114 as a product of its prime numbers in index notation and hence find the square root of 144. So let's first start off by writing 144, okay, as a product of its prime numbers in index notation. 144 is an even number, so I'll first divide it by 2, I'll get 72. Divide 72 by 2, I get 36. Divide by 36 by 2, I get 18. Divide 18 by 2, I get 9. Divide 9 by 3, okay, because 9 is an odd number, cannot divide by 2, so I'll use 3. Okay, so 3 and 3. So I know that I can express 144 as 2 to the power of 4 times 3 squared. Next, I'm going to square root 144. So now if you have a product of two index notations, so you need to halve the power of both of them. So I have 144 is equal to 2 to the power of 4 times 3 squared. So now I'm going to square root it. When you square root something, you're going to halve the power or halve the value of the index. So 2 to the power of 4 now becomes 2 to the power of 2 because half of 4 is 2. Next, 3 to the power of 2. When I square root it, I'll get 3 to the power of 1 because half of 2 is 1. So square root of 144 is equals to 2 squared times 3. 2 squared is 4. 4 times 3 will give me 12. So square root of 144 will give me 12.